there, we're back again. This is the A-Team with our fourth submission for EDF 5705, the Curriculum Resource Project. So in case you've forgotten our names, I'm David.
Andrew.
And I'm Joey. Remy couldn't be with us today, but he sent his notes and we'll include him in the relevant parts of the conversation.
Yep, so we've got 3 articles to discuss today, so let's get into it.
In this one, they focused primarily on the, and their wording was really good, the legal fallacy of terra nullius, meaning that because the white men were able to use the land more efficiently, they didn't see any agriculture or anything like that as part of it, they felt they had a right to use the land because they would put it to the best use. It goes on through the martial laws that were placed, how different ways it was legal to shoot an Aboriginal. If they congregated in groups of more than 6, if he showed up to your house, if he had a weapon and that included their traditional hunting implements, you could shoot him. There was a particular quote where somebody was talking about a man who said the best way to deal with them was to shoot them so that their carcasses could manure the fields.
Goodness.
And that was all they would go for. And he even took it one step further, is that they should really shoot the children and women to make sure that it would fix the problem. And it goes on with white Australia and a lot of the policies. They talked about assimilation. And we all heard about how bad that went, them being able to just steal children from their moms. This said something interesting, saying that it was the one time that the Aboriginals were put into policy as people.
The Mabo legislation has been instrumental, especially in the Northern Territory, in empowering Indigenous communities and allowing them to actually derive income from their own land. It's the stuff that I've read on it is really, really positive. We actually celebrated, because it didn't get enacted until 1993, so there was a lot of celebration last year being the 20th anniversary of the Mabo decision.
In this article, they also talked a lot about, talking about anniversaries and stuff. They were coming up to the centennial and bicentennial of Australia, and it was bringing people's attention to it. There were also groups of students who went across rural Australia and documented the racism that was going on, and it got television, like TV networks started getting interested in it. And so this first world country, Australia, were treating these people in like worse than third world situations. So it's just a really interesting way to bring the awareness up, and it's kind of that having the way everyone else looks at you for what you're doing is a good way for a society to be like, maybe we're doing something a bit wrong.
I believe there's a quote, sunlight is the best disinfectant.
For my favorite quote, I chose, over the past generation, Australians have been forced to confront and come to grips with the real story of Australian history and the nature of Australian identity. This involves recognizing that white Australia, like terra nullius, was a racist lie. I like it because it's something that we have to come to terms with. It's, even in Canada, even in the States, even anywhere where there were Aboriginals when we rocked up, a lot of the stuff we did, we can't go and justify it and say that's the way of the times. You got to accept what it is and move on from it and try to fix it if you can.
So how do you think this article is relevant to us as primary school teachers?
Well, I think it's really important that you have the knowledge of this, because in Australia and a lot of the places we're going to teach, we will have Aboriginal children. And there was another section here that talked about this was almost a secret history. Not as many Australians, like it's not something you grow up learning from in a white family, I don't think. But in an Aboriginal family, for sure, you know everything.
Yeah.
It's a question of how much do you share with them, because some of it is really atrocious, and I wouldn't want to expose kids to that. But at the same time, finding that balance of the right amount of this to teach, and to get them to be aware of what's going on, I think that's really important. And this article is really good. It falls under the Martin article, and for me, of just, here's a lot of information, you're going to need it. How you disseminate it, how you pass it on to students is kind of going to be up to you.
Yeah, well, there's specific sections in our history curriculum that deal with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, so it's something that we're required as part of the curriculum to teach. So this article seems like it's a very handy primer in the same vein as some of those earlier science articles are.
expressed his ideas on how history should be taught from a well-rounded view, not just from one side, and the implications of students learning history and then applying it to the future. And not sort of getting bogged down in the past, but how can this inform us as we move forward? So it was actually really interesting, and I think it's a good article to discuss in regards to teaching history. So whether it be Aboriginal history, where have we started and where are we now in regards to these issues, and what's the other side? You know, we know Captain Cook came in. We know he went to Botany Bay or whatever. What was the other side of that? What was the Aboriginal side of that?
They were doing Captain Cook during my placement.
Yes.
They were doing the bit, and a lot. 90% of what was in that Parbury article just wasn't there, other than the fact that he went there, and the place is now called Cooktown.
Cook Island, perhaps.
Cook Island, there you go.
Oh, okay.
Like, you know, that's what we know. And he came, and he's looked at as a very positive person, but in the Parbury article, that's not really the opinion we really got from it.
Yeah, and it also, Zin was saying in this article, is that when you're presenting sort of difficult topics, such as the Aboriginal version of Australian history, is you have to present it in a way that there is no right or wrong answer to these big questions. There is no side to take. It is just what it is, and how can we explain this and improve on it and create a safe discourse for the class to discuss it.
You mentioned in our discussion before we started filming that there's a part of the Zin article you enjoyed about his experience in college back in the 50s.
Yes. In the 50s, Zin was in Spelman College in Atlanta and found there was no required course in Black history or Asian or African history, but there was a required course in the history of England.
It suggests a Eurocentrism that the Fleer and Jane article on technology from a few weeks ago said the same thing. That the history of technology assumes that everything, you know, all the great inventions came out of Europe. When I was at Haileybury, we did tons of it, and it was all based on European settlement. There wasn't a thing, there wasn't a single lesson on Aboriginal culture or studies or history. It was all about the first fleet, the first, you know, the history of Sydney and Melbourne and the establishment of Canberra.
Yeah.
So again, this sort of Eurocentrism that the Indigenous population was perhaps until recently ignored in history curriculum. So not exactly an objective delivery of history.
No.
Students should be encouraged to go into history in order to come out of it, and should be discouraged from going into history and getting lost in it, as some historians do. So with history, I think it's very important to realise that we didn't just end up here. There's a whole range of political upheavals and battles and socio-economic things that have happened that I think now in the 21st century we seem to take for granted.
The central idea of this article is, it refers to a speech that John Howard made where he, for lack of a better word, whinged about the current state of history curriculum in Australia. So this article sort of highlights the political landscape in terms of the history curriculum and how politics and politicians perhaps sometimes seek to influence how history is taught within Australia, which personally I think is a really dangerous idea. If history isn't taught objectively, there is the potential for, you know, sort of mild indoctrination and, you know, a sort of distortion of the actual facts. First, the study of history, even at school level, is not just about celebration, nor is it just about commemoration. It is fundamentally about investigation and explanation. So sort of confirms my own opinion that history curriculum must be objective-based, not clouded by personal or political opinion.
Yeah, I think that is really kind of scary because I'm reading 1984 by George Orwell at the moment. And in that book, they erase and reinterpret history to suit them. And that sort of has like maybe initial echoes of that book, whereas like political parties are maybe dismissing some aspects in the curriculum because it doesn't fit in with their agenda.
It's intellectually dishonest to present anything to primary school children that isn't fact-based. I'm reminded of the famous quote, "History is written by the victor," but in this case, history should not be a battleground to be fought over by politicians. It should be left to historians. So in Remy's absence, he was able to email us his favourite quote from this article as well. So his favourite quote is, "Conservatives who would like to own and promulgate this past see themselves therefore as anxious guardians of a benign narrative that can easily be threatened by leftist indoctrination at the school level. Labour politicians, on the other hand, generally show little or no anxiety about history because, to paraphrase English academic Terry Eagleton, the left, in a smug way, actually believes that it does own the past." So Remy chose this as a favourite quote, perhaps to highlight again the contentiousness around the history curriculum. So the Zinn and Taylor articles both mention a sort of a Eurocentrist approach to history, and so I think that lends itself, well, it sort of links with Parbury's article about a secret history as well. So perhaps what could be, to borrow Al Gore's phrase, an inconvenient truth for us, the way that we treated the Indigenous people, not just in Australia, but in Canada and in the US and back in Europe as well. Perhaps some people are seeking to squash that sort of inconvenient truth. So this week, I think all the articles lend themselves well to the idea of us teaching diverse learners, especially in Australia where we are so incredibly multicultural. There's a good chance that if you walk into any primary school classroom in the country, you're going to be presented with children from dozens of different backgrounds. I think history is an opportunity for us to engage in sort of robust discussion with our kids and get their own perspectives on their own experiences, I guess.
I guess in regards to diverse learners in a history-based thing, there's a lot of things that you can do. I mean, you can teach them in the class about this, you can get them to do activities, you can get them to role play. And then also, there's immigration museums, there's a national museum, this stuff is everywhere. Like, it's not hard to access. So you can always get kids involved in history. There's sort of no excuse just to skim over it, because it was a living thing and there are still records of it. So, you know, whether you get them to, you go to Sovereign Hill, you know, and you get them to see how the gold rush happened and the Eureka Stockade and what that means now for unionisation and all these sort of things. There is always links from history back to real things, and in a variety of different ways. Film, role play, you know, written word, all these diverse learners from different backgrounds, there'll be some element that they'll be able to gravitate to. So I think that is one of the best things about learning history, is that it is history, it actually happened.
My additional resource for this week is directly related to the Parbury article and the troubles that the Aboriginals had in the history. And it's a website, or an information sheet is what it is specifically, and I found it on humanrights.gov.au. And it's a social justice and human rights for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And it's a nice little Coles note of the history, the rights that they want and the rights that they should have, social justice reports. It has just a whole bunch of information that is just really useful for a teacher to have as another. We were talking about having things as a resource. Yeah. This is another way, and it's not as graphic as a Parbury article. So this is something you could give to a student, I'd say, maybe a 5-6 student there, but that they can disseminate and figure out themselves.
My resource for this week is the TV show and books and theatre production, The Horrible Histories.
Those are awesome.
Which is just a little sketch comedy show which sort of outlines sort of darker aspects of history from sort of colonial times, World War II, you know, mainly with a Western focus, but I think it just is a fun way for students to realise maybe some of the darker things that have happened, and it's engaging for them.
So you'd be able to link that again to Parbury, and this may be a slightly more moderate way of introducing them to, especially to younger students perhaps. Yeah. So my additional resource this week is The Many Forms of Aboriginal Art by Alex Barlow and Margie Hill. So I sort of grabbed this in reference also to the Parbury article, perhaps trying to put more of a positive spin on Aboriginal contributions in history. So it contains, it is basically history and art together, so it'd be perfect for a multidisciplinary unit. As an example, it contains instructions for how to build certain pieces of artwork, a lot of background information as to the significance of things. So just an example, some wood carvings there. So I think this would be really handy for younger students because again, it removes a lot of the angst and the sort of the political language that is perhaps in the Parbury article, and serves as a way, as a good introduction to students who want to learn more about Aboriginal culture. Good way to, again, teach the diverse learners as well. So those visual learners, those kinesthetic learners would benefit hugely from an art-based history class. So Remy gave us an additional resource to discuss as well. It's an article from The Age back in 2010. The title is Black Armband View Risks National Curriculum. It's in reference to Christopher Pyne, who at the time was the opposition education minister but is now our elected education minister, talking about a black arm view approach to the national curriculum. So back in 2010 was when this was still being debated before it was implemented. So again, links really, really well to the Taylor article because it underpins again the sort of the hot political climate that goes with the history curriculum. All right, thanks for joining us again in this penultimate episode of our curriculum resource project. Please stay tuned next week for our final submission.